Welcome to this digital gathering of the Belong Collective. We are very happy that you're with us. The Belong Collective is an inclusive, Jesus-shaped community practicing the way of love for the good of all. You can find more information out about us at thebelongcollective.org, and if you would be interested in supporting us financially, there is a Give tab on our website. You can also connect with us through our Facebook page and our Instagram account. We love when you tag yourselves in our posts. We do have a Belong Collective Facebook group where we share prayer requests and updates. If you are not a part of that group, we would love to add you to that, so feel free to call us, smoke signal, email, whatever is easiest for you, and we will get you connected with that. Thank you so much for joining us.
Throughout my history, your faithfulness has walked beside me. The winter storms made way for spring. In every season, from where I'm standing, I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life. I see your promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. Help me remember when I'm weak. Fear may come, but fear will leave. You lead my heart to victory. You are my strength, and you always will be. I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. See the cross, the empty grave, the evidence is endless. All my sin rolled away because of you, oh Jesus. See the cross, the empty grave, the evidence is endless. All my sin rolled away because of you, oh Jesus. Oh, I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see the promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. So why should I fear? Oh, the evidence is here. So why should I fear? Oh, the evidence is here.
We are slavery's end. Each morning we rise, wide awake and filled with purpose. We fight fearlessly in the name of justice because we believe in a better world and a God who moves us to make it so. We are the church. Beyond a building or a day of the week, relentlessly defending freedom. Not for some distant future, but for today. So that this may be the last generation to be owned, sold, or ignored in their suffering. And though we may be free, we are tied to those still held in bondage. And we will not go away until lives, communities, and nations are transformed, until all countries protect all of their citizens. So, each day we rise again, knowing we are slavery's end. And we will never be free until all are free.
Bring it all to peace. The storm surrounding me, let it break. At your name, still call the sea to still, the rage in me to still every wave. At your name, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. surrounding me, let it break at your name.
You're working 14, 18-hour days with very little sleep, no freedom. Dignity is taken away from them, and that's something nobody should have to endure. We had a number of years ago, 2 of the bonded laborers escaped from a facility, and they were tracked down by the owners of the facility and brought back, and as a punishment for what they had done, their hands were chopped off.
We would go to the government officers and we'd say, sir, there is a bonded labor case. And almost always the response was, there is no bonded labor in my area. What are you talking?
How much? 30? Yeah, I'm free.
Ruchira, there's a girl who's very afraid. Almost unable to walk.
This is Kumar. He was abandoned by his mother, and his father was suddenly killed. Orphaned and alone, he was accountable for his parents' debts. And at just 7 years old, he was forced into slavery.
வேலை செய்யும் போது ஒரு நாள் சார் ரொம்ப கையெல்லாம் ரொம்ப வெளியெடுத்துக்கிச்சு சார் ரொம்ப எரியிற மாதிரி ரொம்ப கொள்ளு தூக்க கூட ஆகமாயிருச்சு சார்.
Kumar remembers a day where he was so ill he couldn't get out of bed. Immediately, his owner came looking for him.
அவங்க வந்து ஏன்டா வேலைக்கு போகலான்னு கேட்டாங்க. நான் சார் உடம்பு சரியில்லைன்னு சொன்னேன். அப்புறம் அவங்க வந்து கூட்டிட்டு போனாங்க, ரூமுக்கு கூட்டு போனாங்க. அப்புறம் ಸೂಕಲ್ಲೇ ವಚ್ಚಿட்டாங்க.
ಗೊತ್ತು ಅವನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಸೇರ್ತು ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಒದಗಿ ತಿಂದಿರೋದು ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ತಿಂದಿರೋದು ಅದನ್ನಿಂಕ
வேற நம்ம அப்பா அம்மா இருந்தால் நம்மளுக்கு நல்லா இருக்கும் அப்படின்னு நினச்சேன்.
Kumar was trapped by debt and a slave owner who beat him continuously. He, like so many, had no remaining hope for a way out. IJM discovered the horrific conditions in the brick factory where Kumar and others were being forced to work against their will. And, based on their undercover video evidence, local government authorities and police came alongside IJM to conduct a rescue operation.
The more and more we are doing these rescues, people are getting aware that people are being abused. There is bonded labor, there is trafficking. Also, the law is going to take its course as well as perpetrators go behind.
When the team arrived in the morning and entered the brick factory, 15 men, women, and children were rescued and given their freedom back. Then, they were each given a certificate to prove that they no longer owe any debts to their former owner. And one was for Kumar. After being rescued, IJM placed Kumar in their aftercare program to heal.
You'd ask him a question anytime, no matter what, and he would say, the one thing I want to do, sir, is I want to study. He was clear about that.
And then, they enrolled him in school for the first time. Today, he is studying to be a social worker, to help those still suffering like he did.
இதை காட்டியிருந்தோன்னா அவர் உண்மையாகவே சந்தோஷப்பட்டிருப்பார். நம்ம ஒரு அன்பாக இருந்தும் நான் இந்த அளவுக்கு இதை காட்டியிருந்தேன்னா.
And what we do at IJM is we go look for that lost sheep, that girl that's being abused, that widow who's been run out of her home. And we will search for her until we find her. That's how our Father has loved us. That's how we are called to love others. Not to search for them until we've satisfied ourselves. Not to search for them until it gets really hard. But to go after them until we find them. To be relentless in our love.
Well, welcome. We are here for Freedom Sunday, and I am here to talk with Ann Michael. She has done work with IJM and has worked with us before for Freedom Sunday, and this is an exciting opportunity to chat with you a little bit about what Freedom Sunday means, why you're connected to IJM, all that. So why don't you give people an introduction to yourself and your commitment to Freedom Sunday and International Justice Mission?
Thanks, Justin. It's great to be here with you today. International Justice Mission is an organization that works to free people from slavery and other forms of oppression and violence. In fact, their mission is to free the poor from violence, and so, or protect the poor from violence. And so I first became involved with International Justice Mission about 12 years ago when I went to Washington, D.C. to help advocate for the reauthorization of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which recently, just this year, is celebrating its 20th anniversary. Wow. And so that was my first experience lobbying, going to Washington, D.C. and meeting with, at that time, my representatives from Ohio. And then 6-7 years ago, we moved here to Pennsylvania. And since that time, I began leading a group of volunteers here in Pennsylvania. And part of that includes mobilizing churches to become involved and partner with IJM to end violence against the poor.
That's very cool. So IJM exists to help stop violence against the poor through legislation primarily, or advocacy, probably lobbying, probably just even building awareness of some of the things that are taking place in our world. Would that be fair? Is there more? Is there less? Is that pretty good grasp of like International Justice Mission, what they do?
Right. Well, number one, they rescue victims of violence. And they also help restore survivors, and they bring criminals to justice, and then they help repair broken public justice systems. And they do all that by partnering with local authorities. So IJM works globally, and so they are in almost 20 different places around the globe, in Latin America and in Southeast Asia and South Asia and in Africa. And so they're doing things like freeing people from bonded slavery, but they're also protecting widows who have had their land taken from them. And they also protect people from police abuse. And so there are lots of areas that they work around the world. And so our job here in the United States, because IJM is headquartered in Washington, D.C., but the job of those of us who volunteer for IJM is to raise awareness, one way by holding events, and some of those events are for fundraising. So we raise resources, we raise awareness, and we also raise our voices in prayer. So we come together and seek to hear the voice of God, who is one of justice. And we believe that IJM is based on that premise that God requires that of us to seek justice for the widow, for the poor, and for the refugee. And so that's a basis of the organization. And so our volunteer work here is advocacy, as we said. So that's meeting with members of Congress, either in their local district office or in Washington, D.C. It also is partnering with churches. Sometimes churches choose to support a particular field office. So maybe in Chennai, India, a church can sponsor that, in a way, that field office, and partner with them. They get to know them. They get to know who it is that is working there in that office and the work that they're doing. It becomes a personal partnership. And as we said before, raising resources and having local prayer events, which the Bridge several years ago first started. And then when we morphed into the Belong Collective, you have supported IJM not only through resources, but also through hosting those events. And we're so grateful for you, Justin, and for Allie as well, who from the beginning, you guys have been supportive and such an encouragement to the volunteers here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, well, we're excited for what you guys are doing, and we're excited that we get to play a part in it. That, I mean, IJM has existed for quite some time, and even as a youth pastor, kind of coming up into ministry, like I saw all that IJM was putting out, and we would even put it in front of our students for fundraisers and for different initiatives and things. And so it's great to see it still thriving and taking place in the world. So when we talk about slavery, for those who might not be aware, for example, like today, slavery is still a significant problem in our world, right? And sometimes people don't necessarily understand that. Obviously, we're talking about human trafficking in that. We're talking about different types of slavery existing, but it's a pretty big problem in our world still right now, right?
Right. Over 40 million people are in bondage in some way through force, fraud, or coercion to a perpetrator. And that can be sex trafficking, as you said, through a brothel, or it can be something now, the newest is the cyber sex trafficking. And that has grown exponentially in the last few years because of the internet. And that's something where a person in Pennsylvania, in Canada, in Ukraine, can log on to a website and watch live a child being sexually assaulted. And so that's something that IJM has become involved with. And from the very beginning of first learning about that, great strides have been made. Rescues are happening even as we talk right now. And yet there are so many more that need to be rescued. And that's why IJM partners with local authorities, because we don't believe that as Westerners we come in and have answers for developing countries, because what we want to do is establish a system and help those countries take ownership of those rescues and that restoration. And it's been amazing to see that happen over the last over 20 years now.
That's what I really like about IJM. It seems like the desire is not a power over, but to empower these systems and structures, not to come in and say, here's our system and structure and lay it right over a culture that might not operate in that way or find that to be redemptive for their situation. Whereas coming in, learning, partnering with the local authorities, local governments, and choosing to kind of give guidance where it's possible, but ultimately allowing them to establish their own framework. I think that's it empowers them to take ownership, like you said. And I think we have a lot that we can learn in kind of our post-colonialism reality from that kind of an approach and that kind of a method to even the injustices that exist in our world. Because sometimes we can come in with the right intentions, but actually end up doing more harm. And I think we've seen that in the history of the church, even coming in with a desire to relieve poverty or to in a lot of ways even release bondage, right? But ultimately creating more problems because we didn't necessarily study the culture ahead of time, understand the ramifications of what vacuum might be left after the fact, right? And so so it's good to see that IJM takes a kind of a holistic approach in that even. Now, I would assume IJM's working with lawyers. Then they have lawyers on staff. They have probably like what kinds of people work at IJM, I guess, and how big is IJM?
So IJM has over 1,000 staff. So they're a group of criminal investigators, attorneys, and social workers and advocates. So they are working, as you said, partnering with local authorities to help public justice systems and public law local law enforcement then to make the arrests, do the investigations, of course, before the arrests, and then the follow through, so that a huge part of it is that the perpetrators have to learn that this criminal activity does not benefit them, that if they participated in it, they will go to jail. And so deterrence for the deterrence for the perpetrators is what's important. And so that they will find another way to make their money other than preying on individuals.
Now, if I was to say, okay, that's a problem out there in other countries, but this isn't an America problem. Like we don't have a problem with trafficking. We don't have a problem with this kind of stuff. I mean, yeah, we should pray for other countries. We should send our resources to the extent that we're able, but this isn't really an America problem. What would you or even IJM say to someone who thought that way?
There's definitely victims of human trafficking, of modern day slavery here in the United States. And in fact, I lead an organization called the Pennsylvania Anti-Human Trafficking Advocacy Work Group here in Pennsylvania. So when we lobby for legislation to address human trafficking here in Pennsylvania. And so many people who are aware of the global problem are also aware of the problem in their backyard. And certainly we need resources here in Pennsylvania. We need law enforcement here and law enforcement training here in Pennsylvania. The difference between the United States and developing countries where IJM works is that we have a functioning public justice system that's imperfect in many ways, and in so many ways even now that are becoming more evident to those of us who have not been victims of that public justice system as our brothers and sisters have.
Yeah.
But the focus of IJM is those developing countries where there is so much more of a need for recognition that the people in those countries that are protected, that have security and protection, are paying for that protection.
Yeah.
They pay for private security. And so what IJM is working toward is protecting the poor from violence through law enforcement, because the laws exist in these countries, they're just not enforced.
Gotcha. Okay. So in Pennsylvania, for example, in your work in Pennsylvania, when you say human trafficking in Pennsylvania, and you and I have talked about this at length, so I'm obviously kind of acting like I don't know. But this goes beyond just like sex trafficking. Certainly that exists, and I was even shocked to hear statistics around even like the Super Bowl and the sex trafficking that happens around that, and like just in America that there's things happening that I think a lot of us are very unaware of. But one of the things you even told me about was like trafficking takes on, and even bondage in this kind of reality takes on like all different kinds of forms. It can be a restaurant worker who busses your table that's, illegal, but ultimately the owner of that establishment is holding their documents. And it's like, I never knew these types of relationships even were existent. So can you just share a little bit about that as we're thinking about Freedom Sunday in the context of certainly outside of I love the idea of starting local and moving to global, this idea that we're called to take the gospel to, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth, that as we even think about justice, we should be thinking about justice for our neighbor and certainly the person who's a world away. And so as we think even about our neighbor right now, like, what are some things that we might see in our community or ways that we can grow in awareness to the injustices that exist right here at home?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's the sex trafficking that gets the media attention. And yet 3/4 of victims of human trafficking are actually within the labor industry. So in agricultural fields, in domestic servitude. So perhaps it's a hotel where people are housekeepers, and or it's in a home where somebody is a captive in a home because they're working as a nanny or housekeeper or maid, or whatever kind of terms you want to use. It's, as you mentioned before, restaurants, massage parlors. Now that's an industry, or it's a company, but that provides a service, but that's often related to sex trafficking. But another area is nail salons. That's a huge area where people are brought from foreign countries and to the United States, and then held captive through force, fraud, or coercion. And so it's interesting how we can focus so much on one area and then our eyes aren't open to what we see. I can remember many years ago when we first moved here to Pennsylvania and being at a restaurant at a buffet, and my husband, we were with family, and he's like, "What is wrong?" And it's like, this person who is bringing our water to us and drinks, whatever, there's just something about her that it just bothers me. And those are the kinds of things that it's really important for people to learn what the red flags are by noticing that somebody doesn't make eye contact, somebody, when you talk to them, just turns away or looks to the person that they're with to answer questions for them. So part of what I've done in other forms of employment in the last few years is training of medical personnel, because people who come into contact with victims of modern day slavery are often in emergency rooms. And also we did a lot of training of law enforcement, because they're also first responders. Those are the people who come into contact with people, and they have to be able to recognize that what you may be seeing as criminal behavior is actually victimization. And so there's a lot that people, just as citizens, can educate themselves on by going on Google and putting in, red flags for human trafficking, and you will find lots of information that you can think and gather and then make use of.
Is there a place to report if I'm sitting down and I'm having a meal and I sense that someone is being coerced into labor by bussing my table, and I'm just like sensing that there's some weird power dynamics in this relationship? What would I even do in that place? Because we also have a whole nother thing in our world right now of Karens, right? Who see everything as a problem, right? And are quick to kind of blow the whistle. Yeah. So how do we temper this with also first of all, I think getting educated and learning about that is really the first step, right? But if I am educated and based on all the kind of red flags, I'm seeing some potential problems here, what's the next step of action that typically one might take, or what really would you do?
There's a human trafficking hotline.
Okay.
And that is a number that you can call, and if you put that in your phone, then you can observe something, you can make a call to that number, and then you are not held responsible for follow-up with that.
Gotcha.
You give the information that you have objectively. So you're seeing this and then they are the ones that do the follow-up. They will contact local law enforcement and local service providers. And so it is not something where you have to be the detective on this, and you just make the call, and then follow-up is made by the human trafficking. Polaris is actually the organization that runs the human trafficking hotline here in the United States.
Gotcha. I was going to say, is that a United States broad thing? Okay. Very cool. Very cool. If someone wanted to connect with IJM, maybe volunteer, or just desire to, like, maybe they're listening to this and they're like, this is something I'm deeply passionate about, and I've been looking for ways to get plugged in the area of human trafficking, in the area of justice work in this particular, reality. How can they get plugged in? What's some like practical steps that they can do to support IJM? Obviously, they can support IJM financially, and I want to encourage that. But beyond that, like, what are some other opportunities that might exist too?
We would love to have you join our team here in Pennsylvania. We have people from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia and all the ways in between, all the places in between, and contact me through Justin, or at amichael@ijmvolunteers.org, or go on to the IJM website, which ijm.org, pretty simple, and then click on volunteers and you'll be connected. You can learn about the various avenues that you can volunteer through: advocacy, through fundraising, through prayer, through communications. And so we would love to talk to you more about where you feel like your skills might fit into our needs, and we'd love to connect with you.
That's awesome. And hopefully whenever we're past this Corona reality, we'll have another prayer gathering, because I know that's something that, again, like you mentioned earlier, that we had hosted once, and wherever it's being hosted, typically in Central PA area, we can encourage people to attend that, and that's a good time as well. So
yeah. We had a virtual prayer gathering this last spring.
Oh, awesome.
And that was great. And so people from across the country came. I also wanted to mention that 12 years ago, the first time that I walked up those steps of the Senate building, nervous as all get out, it was a group of 25 of us that were there with IJM. And a year ago, when we were still together in public, there were over 300 people that were at the Advocacy Summit in Washington, D.C., so representing over 40 of the states coming together. So it's a movement that has grown, and it's grown because individuals have taken the time to say, I want to do something about this. Now that I know, I can't close my eyes to it anymore. And whether it's becoming a Freedom Partner by providing $24 a month for IJM for rescue and restoration, or if it's because you want to meet with your local representative and advocate for funding from the U.S. government to be used in developing countries, or if it's because you want to pray, meet with a group of believers and pray for the work of IJM. Any of those things help. And it in a time where we often feel helpless, we can either be paralyzed with grief and sadness, or we can be motivated to, okay, I'm sad about this, I recognize the reality of it, but then I'm going to take a step and do something. And so I encourage people to do that.
Yeah. And James tells us that true religion is caring for the widow and the orphan, and really the way that was applied in the early church was those who are oppressed, those who are experiencing injustice, that the church would step in and support them and be help them toward freedom, toward whatever that looked like, whatever resources the church had to do so. And so I think we have an obligation based on the words of Jesus, certainly on the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus, even in the story of the sheep and the goats, tells us that when we see people who are in this place, that we should see Jesus in that place, and how would we respond? And so my prayer is that all of our hearts would break for what breaks the heart of God. And I think these people who are in these situations, who are in these desperate situations, that that we would use whatever influence and resources we have to help bring justice and healing into this. And so, Anne, I'm so thankful for your witness and the work you've done and the consistency you've done that work, and bringing that to us as the Belong Collective, encouraging us to get involved. And I'm hopeful that many will see this and feel a sense of opportunity to even get plugged in and to do more. And we're going to continue to explore at the Belong Collective how we can partner more meaningfully in the future, even, because I think this is advocacy work and work ultimately that we need to be a part of as the church. So thank you for your example and for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And thank you for your work, Justin, because it's people like you and churches like the Belong Collective that fuel the work of IJM. Your prayers and your support, that's what keeps it going. It wouldn't exist without you.
Thanks, Anne.
Everyone needs compassion, a love that's never failing. Let mercy fall on me. Everyone needs forgiveness, the kindness of a Savior, the hope of nations. Savior, He can move the mountains. My God is mighty to save. He is mighty to save. Forever author of salvation. He rose and conquered the grave. Jesus conquered the grave. So take me as you find me, with all my fears and failures. Fill my life again. I give my life to follow everything I believe in. Now I surrender. Savior, He can move the mountains. My God is mighty to save. He is mighty to save. Forever author of salvation. He rose and conquered the grave. Jesus conquered the grave. Shine your light and let the whole world see. We're singing for the glory of the risen King. Jesus, shine your light and let the whole world see. We're singing for the glory of the risen King. Savior, He can move the mountains. My God is mighty to save. He is mighty to save. Forever author of salvation. He rose and conquered the grave. Jesus conquered the grave. He rose and conquered the grave. Jesus conquered the grave.